Boundaries in Marriage by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. Picture this. Two couples, both in their golden years, both married for over 40 years. From the outside, their lives mirror each other perfectly. Kids raised, careers built, retirement approaching. But spend an evening with each, and you'll witness two completely different marriages. Meet Harold and Sarah. Dinner's winding down when Harold fishes a dessert ticket from his pocket and slides it across to his wife. Sarah, dessert. Not a question. Not even a please. Just a command. Sarah's cheeks flush. You can practically see the decades of this playing out behind her eyes. But this time, something shifts. Quietly, but with unexpected firmness, she says, "Why don't you get your own dessert?" Harold blinks, caught off guard. He mumbles some joke about uppity women and shuffles off. Later, while he's gone, Sarah apologizes to you. She's embarrassed she stood up for herself in front of guests. And suddenly you understand, these two share a house and a last name, but their hearts stopped connecting years ago. Now consider Frank and Julia. You've been visiting from out of town, and Julia's been driving you around all day. Time to head back to your hotel. Frank glances at his wife and notices something you missed. "You look tired, honey. I'll take him back." Julia hesitates. Part of her wants to protest, to fulfill her duty as host. But she accepts with a grateful smile. "Okay, thanks." The next day, you mention how thoughtful Frank was. Julia's smile widens. It wasn't always that way. She tells you about their early years, how they nearly divorced over his controlling behavior. "I had to draw some hard lines," she says. "It was brutal at times, but it saved us. Now we can't imagine life without each other." Both couples started in similar places, but one harvested 40 years of quiet resentment, while the other cultivated an unbreakable soul connection. So what made the difference? It wasn't about love. Both couples probably loved each other, at least in the beginning. The difference was something subtler, something structural, something most of us never learn. It was about invisible property lines that define where one person ends and another begins. Today we're exploring the brilliant and potentially marriage-saving book, Boundaries in Marriage, by Drs. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. This isn't just for troubled marriages. It's about understanding the fundamental architecture of any thriving relationship. By the end of our time together, you'll understand the single most powerful principle that separates relationships that grow stronger from those that slowly drift apart. You'll discover why love alone is never enough, and why the word no, used correctly, can be the most loving word in your vocabulary. Have you ever watched someone lose themselves in a relationship? Or maybe you felt it yourself. That slow fade where your own wants, dreams, and voice just get smaller and smaller? This was Stephanie's exact struggle. She loved her husband, Steve. He was kind, successful, spiritual, everything she thought she wanted. But years into marriage, she felt strangely distant, actually relieved when he'd go to bed early so she wouldn't have to pretend anymore. One night by the fire, trying to understand this gnawing emptiness, memories washed over her. The time he dismissed her dinner choice. The vacation where they went to his preferred big city instead of her beloved quiet mountains. The promise he made years ago, that she could finish her degree, a promise he now claimed was never convenient for him. It hit her like a wave. Their relationship revolved around what was good for him, rarely what was good for them, and almost never what was good for her. She was sacrificing everything for love, but experiencing precious little love in return. Stephanie's problem, the problem at the heart of countless struggling relationships, wasn't a lack of love, it was a lack of boundaries. So what exactly is a boundary? DRs. Cloud and Townsend offer a beautifully simple metaphor. A boundary is a property line. It shows where your yard ends and your neighbor's begins. This line does three essential things. First, it defines ownership. If you know where the property line is, you know who's responsible for mowing the lawn, pulling weeds, or fixing a broken fence. In relationships, boundaries work the same way. They help us understand who owns what. I own my feelings, my attitudes, my choices, and my behaviors. You own yours. Without this understanding, we fall into what the authors call the ping-pong game of blame. They share the story of Caroline and Joe, who couldn't stop fighting. Asked why he was so angry, Joe said, "Because she always tries to control me." Asked why she was so controlling, Caroline said, "Because he never pays attention to me." Back and forth it went, each batting the ball of responsibility over the net. Neither would say, "I have a problem with anger, and I need to work on it," or "I have a problem with nagging, and I need to change." In their minds, their behavior was always caused by the other person. This is the oldest story in the book, literally. When God asked Adam why he ate the forbidden fruit, Adam pointed to Eve. When God asked Eve, she pointed to the serpent. The first rule of boundaries: you must take ownership of your own property. Your feelings are your responsibility. Your choices are your responsibility. Your happiness is your responsibility. It's not your partner's job to make you happy, and it's not your job to make them happy. This leads to the second powerful idea, responsibility. Once you know what you own, you know what you're responsible for. As long as Joe blames Caroline for his anger, he's powerless to change. He has to wait for her to change before he can feel better. But the moment he realizes, my anger is my problem, he suddenly has power to do something about it. This isn't about blame. It's about empowerment. The things you own are the things you can change. And this brings us to the third, perhaps most liberating concept: freedom. The authors tell us that God designed us to love each other freely, not to be enslaved by each other. A woman named Jen felt miserable and trapped by her husband's irresponsible behavior. She saw herself as a victim with no choices. But she wasn't. She had the freedom to stop paying for his mistakes, the freedom to stop rescuing him from his messes, the freedom to set limits on how his behavior affected her. Your partner cannot make you do anything. They cannot make you feel a certain way. They can try to influence, pressure, or guilt you, but the final choice is always yours. Realizing this freedom is the key that unlocks the prison door. Love cannot exist where there's control. It only thrives where there's freedom. These three ideas, ownership, responsibility, and freedom, form what the authors call the triangle of boundaries. And at the center sits the fourth crucial element: love. Here's how it works in a beautiful cycle. When you feel loved and accepted, you feel more free to be yourself. As you embrace that freedom, you take more responsibility for your life. As you become more responsible, you become more loving. And that increased love creates even more freedom, which leads to more responsibility, which leads to more love. This is the engine of a growing, thriving relationship. So how do we actually create these property lines? They aren't physical fences. They're built with different tools. Sometimes, the boundary is your words. A simple no is a powerful boundary. I don't like it when you speak to me that way is a boundary. I need some time to myself is a boundary. Stephanie lost herself because she stopped using her words to define what she wanted and didn't want. Another tool is truth. Living honestly, both with God's principles and with each other, creates a safe structure. When you pretend you're okay when you're not, you create two relationships, the fake one on the outside and the real, hidden one on the inside. Intimacy gets lost. Sometimes words and truth aren't enough. That's when you need consequences. A consequence isn't punishment, it's the natural outcome of an action. The authors tell the story of Regina, whose husband Lee was an alcoholic with a cruel, angry streak. For years she tried to love him better, becoming nicer whenever he was meaner. But her love only gave him permission to be more unloving. Finally, she set a consequence. She told him to get help or move out. He didn't believe her at first, but she stood her ground, and he eventually moved out. Faced with the real-world consequence of losing his family, Lee finally took his problem seriously, got help, and a year and a half later they reconciled, their marriage saved. Regina's consequence was an act of profound love. It protected her, her children, and ultimately, the marriage itself. Other boundaries might include creating emotional distance to protect your heart when trust is broken, or physical distance, like leaving the room during a heated argument. And sometimes, the boundary is bringing in other people, a counselor, pastor, or support group, to provide structure and support you can't create alone. It's vital to understand that boundaries aren't about controlling your spouse. That's a common and dangerous misunderstanding. You can't tell your husband, "You can't speak to me that way anymore." That's unenforceable. But you can set a boundary on yourself. You can say, "If you speak to me that way, I will walk out of the room." One is a futile attempt to control another person. The other is a powerful act of self-control. You're only in control of yourself. So, what happened to Stephanie? She realized she couldn't blame Steve for her unhappiness. She was the one who'd been silent, who'd given up her dreams, who was afraid of conflict. She took ownership of her passivity. But she didn't run away to find herself. The authors make a brilliant point here. Boundaries are only real inside a relationship. Running away isn't setting a boundary. It's avoiding the need to set one. Instead, Stephanie started speaking up. She brought her feelings, her desires, and her opinions to Steve. It was hard. There was conflict at first. But Steve, faced with the potential loss of closeness with his wife, began to change too. He learned that life wasn't just about him. He learned to love her independence instead of being threatened by it. And as they both grew, their love deepened into a true intimacy they'd never known before. They'd finally learned that for two people to become one, they must first have the courage to be two separate people. Now, understanding what boundaries are is one thing. Applying them is another. The authors lay out 10 fundamental laws of boundaries that operate in our lives, whether we know it or not, just like gravity. The first law is the law of sowing and reaping. Actions have consequences. They tell the story of Amy and Randall. Whenever Randall was stressed from work, he'd become moody and withdrawn, occasionally lashing out in anger. Amy's response was always to try and manage his mood. She'd try to cheer him up, encourage him, and make the whole family walk on eggshells to avoid upsetting him. The problem? Randall was sowing anger and selfishness, but Amy was reaping all the consequences. He had no reason to change because she was doing all the work for him. The law of sowing and reaping says we must lovingly allow our partners to experience the natural consequences of their own actions. If Randall sows withdrawal and anger, he should reap loneliness and isolation, not a wife who works overtime to make him feel better. This isn't punishment, it's reality, and it's how we grow up. The second law is the law of responsibility. This clarifies the first one. We're responsible to each other, but not for each other. The Bible says to carry each other's burdens, which refers to overwhelming crises like illness or tragedy. But it also says each one should carry his own load, which refers to daily responsibilities, our own feelings, attitudes, and choices. Your partner's unhappiness is their load to carry. You can be supportive and loving, but you cannot carry it for them. Taking responsibility for their happiness is an impossible and destructive project. The third law is the law of power. This is about knowing what you have power to do and what you don't. You don't have the power to change your spouse. You can't make them grow up or force them to stop a bad habit. What do you have power over? You have the power to change yourself. You have the power to confess your own faults. You have the power to stop your own enabling behaviors. And you have the power to influence them. Influence isn't control, but it's powerful. By changing your own actions, you change the dynamic of the entire relationship. The fourth law is the law of respect. This is the other side of the coin. If you want your spouse to respect your boundaries, you must respect theirs. It's easy to get excited about finally being able to say no, but it's much harder to hear no. Mature love desires the freedom of the other person as much as its own. The fifth law is the law of motivation. This law is profound. You must be free to say no before you can wholeheartedly say yes. Think about Jen, who hated sports but went to hockey games with her husband Larry because she was afraid he'd be angry if she didn't. She said yes, but she was resentful, withdrawn, and miserable the whole time. Eventually, Larry said, "I'd rather you not go than go and not really be there." A yes that comes from fear, guilt, or obligation isn't a gift of love. It's a payment to avoid conflict, and it poisons the relationship. The sixth law is the law of evaluation. You need to evaluate the pain your boundaries cause. Does the pain lead to injury, or does it lead to growth? Trent's wife, Megan, was a compulsive shopper, putting them in serious financial jeopardy. Trent avoided setting limits because he knew taking away her credit card would cause her immense pain, reminding her of a poor childhood. He was confusing her pain with injury. Her spending caused no immediate pain to her, but it was deeply injuring the marriage. When he finally set a limit, she felt a lot of pain, but no real harm was being done. In fact, that pain forced her to confront the issues she was avoiding through shopping, and she began to heal and mature. Sometimes, the pain caused by a boundary is the best friend a relationship can have. The remaining laws build on these. The law of proactivity says to address issues before they explode, rather than reacting after damage is done. The law of envy warns us that focusing on what others have, or what our spouse should be, prevents us from working on what we can control, ourselves. The law of activity says we must take initiative rather than passively waiting for our spouse to change first. And finally, the law of exposure states that a boundary must be communicated. A limit you keep inside your head doesn't exist in the relationship. Now, this all sounds great, but it leads to the single hardest step in this entire journey: setting boundaries with yourself. This is the chapter the authors joke that no one wants to read. We all want to learn how to change our spouse. But the first and most critical boundary we must set is often with our own impulses. Remember Lynn? Her husband Tom was chronically late for dinner. She'd tried everything: nagging, cajoling, guilting, and nothing worked. Finally, she stopped trying to change Tom and started making changes in herself. She realized her nagging and anger weren't helping. In fact, they were making him want to avoid coming home. So she set 2 boundaries on herself. First, she set a limit on her impulse to attack him. She committed to being approachable and caring, even when he was late. Second, she set a limit on her enabling. She told him calmly, "I love you and want you here for dinner, but if you can't get here on time, I'll have your dinner put away in the fridge. You can reheat it yourself." Tom didn't like it. For the next few days, he ate a lot of microwave dinners. But something shifted. First, coming home was no longer a war zone. His wife was nicer. Second, he hated reheating dinner. The combination of love and a real-world consequence did what years of nagging never could. He started structuring his day to get home on time. Lynn solved the problem by taking ownership of her own reactions. This brings us to one of the most foundational ideas in the entire book. The prerequisite for two becoming one is that you must first be two whole people. Many people enter marriage unconsciously hoping their partner will complete them. This is a recipe for disaster. Marriage isn't designed to complete you. It's designed for two complete people to complement each other and build something new together. The authors share a powerful story about Amanda and Eric. Amanda was kind and loving but had trouble being assertive. She adapted to everyone, unable to stand up for herself. At a party, she saw Eric, suave, strong, and incredibly assertive. She was instantly swept off her feet. He felt like the missing half of her personality. They married quickly, and the very quality that attracted her became her worst nightmare. His assertiveness was actually domineering control, and because she lacked the strength to stand up to him, she felt herself disappearing in the marriage. What Amanda didn't realize was that Eric was attracted to her for the same reason. He was terrified of vulnerability and weakness, so he found her sweet, compliant spirit intoxicating. She had the part of a whole personality that he was missing. They weren't complementing each other's strengths. They were trying to plug the holes of their own incompleteness with each other, and it always backfires. You end up resenting in your partner the very thing you need to develop in yourself. Their healing only began when Amanda learned to become more assertive, and Eric learned to embrace vulnerability. They had to become two whole people before they could truly become one. This principle of wholeness extends to how a marriage interacts with the world. A healthy marriage isn't a closed-off, two-person island. It needs protection from intruders. But intruders aren't always what they seem. The authors explain that when things like work, kids, hobbies, or even church start to come between a couple, it's almost always a symptom of a deeper problem. Nature abhors a vacuum. If there's distance, conflict, or unresolved hurt in a marriage, that vacuum will get filled by something else. Busyness becomes a way to numb the pain of a disconnected relationship. The problem isn't the hobby or the job. The problem is the vacuum that allows the intruder in. This is often caused by a process called triangulation, where one spouse brings a third party, be it a person, an activity, or an addiction, into a two-person problem to avoid dealing with it directly. So what do you do when conflict inevitably arises? The first step is recognizing that not all conflicts are the same. The authors identify 6 different kinds, but they boil down to a few key categories. Conflicts caused by one person's sin or wrongdoing. Conflicts caused by one person's immaturity or brokenness, which isn't sin, but a lack of ability. Conflicts over hurt feelings where no one is really at fault, and conflicts over simple, differing desires. Knowing which kind of conflict you're in helps you know how to solve it. But the most important distinction isn't the type of conflict, but the type of person you're in conflict with. The authors draw a line between a boundary-loving spouse and a boundary-resistant spouse. A boundary lover is someone who, even if they don't like it, is open to feedback. They can take ownership of their mistakes. They value their partner's freedom and feelings. With a boundary-loving spouse, conflict resolution is a team sport. You can be direct, speak truth in love, and work toward a solution together. The story of Robbie, the workaholic with a drinking problem, is a perfect example. His wife Shelley was terrified to confront him, expecting a huge fight. But when she did, his response was, "I'm so grateful we're doing this. I've been concerned for a while. I need help." The process was easy, not because the problems were easy, but because he was willing to work on them. But what if your spouse is boundary resistant? What if they deny, blame, rationalize, or attack when you bring up a problem? This is the story of Michael and Sharon, who was driving them into bankruptcy with her spending. Every time Michael tried to talk about it, she'd resist the limit, insisting they needed whatever she bought. For years, he thought his job was to make more money to fund her spending. His friend finally told him the truth. "Your problem isn't that you don't make enough money. Your problem is that Sharon doesn't like to hear the word no." Dealing with a boundary-resistant spouse is one of the hardest challenges in a relationship, and the authors provide a clear, courageous path forward. It's not a path of nagging, blaming, or silent suffering. It's a path of loving, firm, and consistent action. First, and this is non-negotiable, you must build strong, supportive relationships outside of your marriage. If your spouse is your only source of love and connection, you'll never have the strength to set a boundary, because the fear of their withdrawal will be too great. Second, you must take a hard look in the mirror and own your part of the problem. Have you been enabling the behavior? Have you been silent when you should have spoken? You must clean up your side of the street first. Third, after doing your own work, you invite them to change. You speak truth in love, clearly and specifically, focusing on how their behavior affects you. Fourth, if they resist, you give a warning. If this continues, I'll have to take steps to protect myself. This isn't a threat. It's revealing the natural consequences of their choices. Fifth, if the behavior still continues, you establish a consequence. You follow through calmly and consistently, not out of anger, but out of a commitment to reality and self-preservation. This is where you stop rescuing them from the effects of their choices. You let them feel the pain they're creating. This process can be long, painful, and filled with doubt, but it moves you from a place of helpless suffering to a place of empowered, purposeful action. The authors end with a critical warning about misusing boundaries. Boundaries aren't a weapon to punish your spouse. They're not an excuse for selfishness. And most importantly, divorce is not a boundary. Divorce is the end of a relationship. Boundaries are the tools you use inside the relationship to try and save it. The story of Kelly, who left her emotionally distant husband Scott as her first boundary, is a tragic example of this misuse. She skipped all the hard work of love, confrontation, warning, and consequences, and went straight to the exit. God's plan is always for redemption, and that requires staying in the fight, suffering in the right way, for the sake of truth and love, rather than suffering in the wrong way by enabling destruction through our silence and fear. As we wrap up our exploration of boundaries in marriage, what's the one thing that truly stays with you? For me, it's the profound and liberating idea that the healthiest relationships aren't built on two people merging into one fuzzy, undefined entity. They're built on two strong, whole individuals who have the courage to remain separate so they can have the freedom to truly come together. A great marriage isn't about finding your other half. It's about two whole people choosing to build a life together. The most powerful and perhaps uncomfortable lesson from this book is that in any relationship conflict, the only person you have power to change is yourself. We spend so much energy trying to fix, manage, or control our partners, when the real path to a better relationship often starts with a single, difficult question. What is my part in this? Am I enabling? Am I being silent out of fear? Am I blaming them for my own unhappiness? Answering that question honestly is where true transformation begins. This book redefines love. It shows us that love isn't always about saying yes. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to say no. To say, I love you too much to let you continue hurting yourself, hurting me, and hurting this relationship. That kind of love requires immense courage, but it's the kind of love that builds something that can last a lifetime. So how can you start applying these ideas today? Here are a few simple thoughts. First, take a small step toward ownership. Think of one recurring frustration in your life or a relationship. Instead of focusing on the other person, just ask yourself, what's one thing I could do differently in my response? Maybe it's not reacting with anger. Maybe it's speaking up sooner. Just focus on your part. Second, practice a small, loving no. This week, identify one thing you typically say yes to out of guilt or obligation, something that leaves you feeling drained or resentful. Find a gentle but firm way to say no, not as a rejection of the other person, but as a yes to your own well-being and sanity. And third, communicate one need. So often, we expect our loved ones to be mind readers. Today, think of one small thing you need, a little help, a moment of quiet, a word of encouragement, and find a simple, clear way to ask for it without blame or expectation. That was a deep dive into Boundaries in Marriage by Drs. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. We've explored the core ideas today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a travel brochure. The real adventure happens when you take the trip yourself. The magic of a great book is in the quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple phrase connects with your own life in a way you didn't expect. This summary is your map, designed to help you decide if this is a journey worth taking. If anything we've talked about today has struck a chord with you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning concepts. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see yourself, your relationships, and the powerful role you play in creating the love you desire. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Billionaire's Bookshelf. It's a small click for you, but it means the world to us and ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.